Okay, good evening. Welcome to the 22nd ACoP Forum. My name is Ying Zi. I will be doing the welcome and introduction. For those who are new to ISS, our ISS vision is to enable a digital economy that is always learning and always leading. Our mission is to develop digital talent through education, applied research, consulting, and also career services. That's our ISS vision and mission. And in ISS, we conduct what we call practice-based education, which means that we not only inculcate the theory to you, but our programs are also very rigorous in terms that we also give you workshops, right? And also provide you the industry perspective. So it's not just academic focus. This is just a snapshot of our practice-based education in ISS, ranging from our Masters of Technology program that you can see on the left-hand side, right? And also our executive education, ranging from our cybersecurity courses to our enterprise architecture courses, right? Just a snapshot. We will also be conducting this new Developing Cybersecurity Architecture course, May, July, and October. Right, so for some of you who may want to learn how to architect cybersecurity in organizations with a focus on traceability to business objectives, then this course will be a good course to attend. And for practitioners who want to learn how to formulate security strategy considerations for cyber physical systems, cloud, and Internet of Things in Industry 4.0, this course will also provide information on that. Back to the architecture community of practice. The ACoP community is actually made of passionate professionals specializing in various architectures like enterprise architecture, all the way to business, security, and also solution architectures. The ACoP Forum was formed with the objective of promoting the advancement of architecture practice in this vibrant community of practitioners. So that's the objective of why we formed the ACoP practice in ISS. We have been running this forum for coming to close to 7 years, right? This is our 22nd forum. We also welcome contributions from any of the practitioners. Let's say you have architecture experience to share, right? So you can get in touch with me or any of our ACoP core team members. So for this session, please mute your microphone. If you want to ask a question during the session, you can unmute, or you could also type your questions into the chat window, right? We will try to address your questions. And another thing to note is that please also help us to complete the e-feedback form at the end of the webinar for us to gather your feedback and also to improve the sessions. Tell us what you would like to hear on architecture practices, right? Then we'll try to arrange for future sessions. I would advise that you complete, let's say, after the session, right, before you log off, just go to the survey feedback. This is the link, right? And then complete the feedback before you log off the Zoom session. Once we receive your feedback, say around 3 working days, 3 to 4 working days, after that, we will actually send you the link to the presentation slides. So for tonight's program, we are happy to have Mr. Sajeevkumar, who is the agency CISO, right, of Singapore Food Agency, to share with us on architecting cybersecurity in organizations with a focus on threat modeling. So without further ado, I will hand over the session to Sanjeev.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So, Insa, I will share my screen, right?
Yeah, yes.
Just give me a second. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Hope you had a good dinner. So I would like to thank ISS, especially Engze, for inviting me to this 22nd Architecture Community of Practice session. Today I will be covering the topic cybersecurity threat modeling. Before I start, I would like to mention usual statement. These case studies and examples are from my experience and research, purely for illustration purposes, and do not represent my work for any customer or any organization. So just would like to start with, as you know, this COVID-19 time. As you already knew, the digitalization is disrupting the business models and the processes and the way we do our day-to-day work. The digitalization is here to stay and having a great impact across the industries and sectors. The COVID-19 pandemic brought another disruption on the top of it and was an eye-opener for several businesses. The early adopters of the flexible productivity and virtual collaboration, and those who practiced business continuity processes, will see a much higher degree of speed and efficiency during this period. COVID-19 pandemic made companies to step back and reevaluate the way they do their businesses and learn from it and move on. COVID-19 pandemic, you can see that there are many businesses affected, but some of them overcome these difficulties due to their prudency and planning and how to do their businesses in the future, and regardless of how do they do their business now. So that's actually, you can see in the COVID-19 situation, there are many businesses affected with a high exposure, and some having a low exposure, or some having a moderate exposures. But there are some companies like internet service companies, retail, and especially like gold mining. They have a positive impact. So gold mining, probably you might think that why gold mining? So if you look at the gold mine, the processes in the gold mine, 99% of the work is automated, and you can see the big trucks running over the gold mine, collecting the mud, the soil, which is fully automated robots. So they already in that age, in the digital disruption, and they already in that process of doing betterments. So you can see that they have a positive impact out there. Whereas there are some businesses which they do not have any choice. Example like airlines, to have a break or to cope up with the current situation. As the pandemic progresses, the cyber criminals are getting more opportunities, as mentioned here. You can see that there are many situations now. There are many situations we are getting with a lot of hacking news. Example like social security website that's starting claims. Example like an Italian security website down, as well as in the WHO sites are already attacked by elite hackers, and the COVID-19 vaccine testing facilities attacked by cyber criminals, and also even the Windows machines in the hospitals and the health workers are affected. So this is there to exist now. And hackers are preying on fears of COVID-19, and here are some examples. So the tax refunds in the government, UK government, they're acting as a UK government site, but behind it is a malware. And the donations, example like COVID-19 donations in Bitcoin accounts. So that's one of the earliest sites came up during the coronavirus situation in Wuhan city. Whereas the fake online sales offerings, you can see that the quite expensive laptops are giving in a very small price, and that may be suspicious for many of us, but there are still a lot of people went to victim of these kind of sites. And the work from home is a new norm, and most of us are staying at home. So if you do work together with your kids, especially when they are staying at home, or you have to keep up your work together with managing your pets, or even you do the exercise at home. And there comes the hackers, and you see that phishing scams are quite a lot. Probably you might have seen in your emails, you are getting tons of scams, phishing emails, as well as in the as you know, the Zoom site. So hackers are hacking the Zoom conferencing, and you can see that there are a lot of news now. This one is one in India, and you can see that cybersecurity cases, the issues rise by 82.5%. So this is quite alarming. So with everyone working from home, the VPN security is very important for those who connect laptops to your company for work. And there are some of the challenges in VPN security that I will, you can see that these are the challenges, and I will be explaining this as a case study. So we can see that phishing attacks or unpatched VPN servers, DDoS attacks or logging and monitoring issues, RDP connections, from outside the company, and endpoint security of your laptops and all. So these, I will take it as a case study in the end of the session, and I'll explain to you how the threat modeling works. And from the aspects, I just want to connect the cybersecurity to the enterprise architecture, because this is an enterprise architecture forum, and how this is connected. And if you see, there is the TOGAF framework, EF framework, and most of the cybersecurity topics are coming in the part 3, where the architecture development method, the techniques are tightly coupled with the security, especially in the new frameworks. Because if you look at the time that I studied the TOGAF framework, which is in TOGAF 8, you cannot see the security part, but now you can see quite a large number of security topics coming into the TOGAF framework. And see that we'll see much more higher into that ADM side, where you can see that the enterprise security architecture tightly coupled with the ADM in certain areas, which is mainly the preliminary area, business information. Actually, it is with the technology architecture. Then also with the opportunities and solutions, and implementation of the governance, and as well as you know, the requirement management side. So if you look at from the enterprise security architecture part, there are 2 important aspects of security here: enterprise risk management and information security management. So the management and control of security risk is an integral part of the corporate governance. The current trends are like the corporate boards are focused directly on the risk management. So you can see that quite a lot of emphasis on the risk management part, which is mainly to look at the risk assessments, risk appetite of the business, and business impact analysis. So all these are part of the risk measurements. Yeah. And the information security management will cover the rest of the topics. Example like security policies, risk assessments, and the trust frameworks, even the security domain model. So the threat model actually coming under security domain model, but there are some aspects of the threat model will come in the services catalog also. So in the security services catalog, you see more for the information security systems architecture, even including a technology architecture. You can see that most of the security implementations like identity at IAM, the identity and access management, then the penetration testing and system hardening, and all, you can see it will be coming in the security services catalog. Whereas the risk mitigation plan will come in the opportunities and solutions, where how do we mitigate the risk, and the security audit part will be coming under and the training and awareness, of course, they're coming under the governance part. And the requirement management, which affects all the A to H of the ADM, which is mainly covering the security standards and security objectives. So these are mainly covering those enterprise security architecture with the enterprise architecture. So you can see that the correlation between the enterprise security architecture and the enterprise architecture. So I would like to move further down. So we start with the framework, then we went into the ADM. Then I am going towards the development part, or the development and testing part. So that's why I just put here SDLC, which I would like to check what's the difference between waterfall DevOps and DevSecOps. These are the three models that currently very popular in our development side. So I'd like to show you how this affects and where the security and the threat modeling comes in. So I'm just putting a graph of cost versus time. And if you look at the defect curve, what do you mean by defect curve? So the defect curve, any point of time, if you look at, if the time increases, the cost of solving that defect will increase. So in this example, I just show you mainly the waterfall versus agile. So DevOps and DevSecOps are more on the agile side. So in the waterfall side, if you see a defect found via code review versus a program defect found via system testing. So you see, so once you reach to a system testing, and if you found a program defect, the cost will be higher. Where if you see a design defect found at system testing, so this is supposed to be, you need to relook at the design, so your cost will be more. Whereas if you see a defect at the requirement side, then that will be a much higher cost, because you have assumed the requirement differently. Okay? Whereas in the agile methodology, if you look at these are the technologies where DevOps are using, like a pair programming or continuous integration. The costs, the program defect will be fine at the time of the development itself. So your cost will be very less, cost for fixing the defect. Whereas in the if a design defect or a program defect found via a test-driven development, or including the SAST and DAST. So I'll just give a small description. The SAST is one of the technologies that use in the DevOps, where we do static application system testing, which is more towards security testing. Whereas in the DAST is mainly the dynamic application system testing, which is an automated testing. So the static as well as dynamic. And a requirement defect, if you look at the requirement defect in the waterfall methodology versus a requirement defect found via stakeholder participation. So agile methodologies that have a very, very frequent interaction with stakeholders. So with the stakeholder participation, you can see that the requirement defects will be solved in a much less cost, as well as in the MVPs. That means the model storming. So MVPs are a minimum viable product. That's a term in Agile where users will be experience the one stage of, or the final a model of a final stage product in a very less featured way. That will have very less cost compared to the requirement defect found via user testing. And the threat modeling also will be in the similar directions, where we can see that when we model something that we can foresee, instead of we see that at the time of a system testing or a penetration testing in terms of security, the cost will be much lesser. So that's the importance of the threat modeling. So before I go to threat modeling, I would like to give a bit introduction to secure by design. So what is secure by design? There are quite a lot of descriptions on the secure by design. But when you look at, maybe I'll just go through that. One, they're saying secure by design is a proactive, pragmatic, and strategic approach that considers risk and security from onset of any new initiatives. So, and nurtures trust at every stage. So basically, they are looking at a new initiative and a proactive approach. So that's main takeaways from there. Whereas the second description, what they're saying is that embedding security into your development projects from the start. So that's another way of telling it. Other one is security by design. Secure by design is an approach to software and hardware development that seeks to make systems as free of vulnerabilities and impervious to attack as possible. So if we compare that, secure by design is a methodology or a definition where the threat modeling will materialize it. So that's the way that I want to describe. And if you see, most of the time, you can see the design is connected to a design because it's a new initiative, it's from the start, and is in the development time. So design time or development time, you need to start working on the security part where the threat modeling comes in. But most of you are already in the stage where you are maintaining a system which might be already in the production for few years or long years. So you might be thinking how this will work. So anyway, it will work for a new project without any doubt. But if you look at from an existing, if you want to implement a threat modeling or a secure by design in an existing application or a product, that will be, as I mentioned in my previous session, previous slide, the cost will be much higher. So that's a difference. So if you can justify the cost for the sake of the security as well as your the prudency of your systems, you can use this threat modeling for any existing products or applications, or even the hardwires or networks. So that's a difference when we compare the new initiatives versus the existing applications. So OWASP, probably you might have heard of OWASP. OWASP is Open Web Application Security Projects. They come up with many principles, including security principles. So this is a design principles, secure by design principles by OWASP. There are 10 principles they have given. So maybe I just go through slightly on these, touch upon that. Minimize attack surface area. Minimize attack surface area means your applications, your developers may like to add more features than actually required. So that will increase the problems. It will increase the probability of getting higher risk. So you have to make sure that you are using very minimal functionalities that are absolutely necessary for your business. So that's the first principle. The second one is establish secure defaults. So you have to look at what are the defaults that you use, which are supposed to be moving towards the security purposes. Example like HTTP versus HTTPS. So you can say that your default is HTTPS, a secured HTTP service, where probably in a company inside your organization itself, you may not need an HTTPS. You may need only HTTP. But if you make a security as a default function, then you can always categorize it as everywhere. If you use HTTP, you should use HTTPS. So instead of HTTP itself, that will make your applications more secure. So that's the meaning of the secure defaults. And the principle of least privilege. That's mainly if you're working in the IT development or in the maintenance operation side, you might already see this example, like if there's a production problem. There are many cases in my past experiences where developers or the vendors are having admin access to the production to investigate the problems. That actually should not be the case, but these kind of practices you may need to look into. So that's the principle of least privilege. You have to give a privilege that absolutely necessary to do that function. So also you can see that the privileges where the person is having creation access as well as an approval access together. That's also an additional privilege for the person. So these are the principles that you need to look at and restrict it. And a principle of defense in depth. So defense in depth, in the sense, defense should not be at the very first layer. So the defense supposed to have multiple layers in your application, where you supposed to have a check on this each and every layers of the application. So that will provide an extra security into your applications. And fail securely. As you know, I have seen many websites. If you give in anyone in some of the fields in the forum fields, you give some gibberish, rubbish, then it will provide you the server names, the versions, everything, because it's an error, and they couldn't find that exact scenario, and it will come out as an error which will show in the website. So all these will affect your systems, where hackers can understand what kind of systems are using behind, what kind of servers and versions are using behind, and that will give them more idea how to penetrate into your systems. So fail securely. So every time when you code, you're supposed to have a coding guidelines where you need to restrict and to check that the fail criteria. And don't trust services. This is mainly for the third-party services, APIs. You can see that the services coming, you can use it from outside your organizations, and possibilities that may not be the actual service or APIs that intend to do, and it may be modified by somebody else, and you may use it and it may affect your systems. So you don't trust it, but you always, whenever you use, you're supposed to have a mechanism to check whether there's an original service or not. Then separation of duties, as I mentioned, a previous example, like if you have a privilege to create as well as approve something, that should not be. So you need to look at how you segregate these duties. Avoid security by obscurity, means it's not clear, unclear, or cases. So you should have a clear usage and how do you manage the security, and keep security simple, so I don't complicate it. Yeah. So that's why the obscure things are coming up. And fix security issues correctly. So security issues may come in, you need to have a frequent checks, frequent testing, and whenever you find an issue, you need to give more importance to fix that issue than finding another issue. Yeah, so that's the balance that you need to do. So these are the secure by design principles. Now I come to the threat modeling part. So threat modeling, just to give a Wikipedia definition, threat modeling is a process by which potential threats such as structural vulnerabilities or absence of appropriate safeguards can be identified, enumerated, and mitigations can be prioritized. So when you look at the definition, it's a potential threat. So actually the threat modeling you are doing before you start your development or design, or at the time of your design. So you didn't identified it or didn't realize it in actual scenario. These are the potential threats. It may come, may not come. Yeah. So that's a scenario. Example, like it's just a common sense. Like suppose you are buying a house, a new house. You might check many things, like the road in front of you, in front of your house, is having a very high traffic, whether it's noisy surroundings or your neighbors are okay. So these are the check. You may not need to have that happen. Yeah. So you always do the check. So whenever you have a solution or a plan to design a system or an application, always if you have that few questions when you ask. So the 3 questions I mentioned here are, what are the most relevant threats? So what kind of threats may happen? So that's one way of asking a question. Other one is, where am I most vulnerable to attack? So in my current situation, what are the weaker points? And third one is, what do I need to do to safeguard against these threats? So what are the things I need to do? So threat modeling is all about that. It's actually quite simpler topic, and one can easily follow the steps. So I'm giving you the simplest steps to do that, so that you can practice it in your actual day-to-day life. So there are many methodologies you can see in internet. There are many methodologies used by many organizations, but what I have given here are very relevant, it's okay to use. If you want to try to use it, you can just look into the help in internet and just Google it and see how they are using it. It's quite easy to do if you know the fundamentals. Yeah. So the first one is the VAST, Visual, Agile, and Simple Threat. As the name say, it's mainly using for the DevOps portfolios, scalable infrastructures, more enterprise focused. So VAST is more visualizations. Octave is non-technical risk focused. Mainly the organizational risk and asset-centric risk. Which is quite robust, but it do not have a scalability much. So if you are certain about the number of systems, not much scalable in the future years, and so you can use Octave. So Trike is acceptable risk focused. That is an open source technology, open source methodology, and it's a risk-based approach. It's an acceptable risk-based approach. So, and Pasta is mainly looking at the attacker side, so attacker focused. This is good for organizations. It's work best for organizations to align the threat objectives with the strategic objectives. Yeah. So it's quite familiar, quite well known about among the security field. Today I would like to explain the STRIDE. The STRIDE is the simplest methodology of all these, and it's more developer focused. So it's actually looking at how we develop, even including you can use it for design or including the network part. So doesn't mean that only developer related topics can be used, yeah, to do the threat modeling. So it is a very simplistic but very powerful. I try to use the others, example like a Pasta or VAST, but it's quite okay if we know that the topics you can use it. But whenever I try to use others, I always come back to STRIDE, because the STRIDE is having a very simplistic way to look into most of the vulnerabilities that happens, and it is quite effective. So STRIDE stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, then DOS, elevation of privileges. Yeah. So these are the topics that we are covering today. And as you know, the security principles like confidentiality, integrity, and availability, that will cover in STRIDE. So that's the beauty of STRIDE. So I just want to get into that STRIDE threat modeling. So what STRIDE threat modeling will do, STRIDE will do is a fully breakdown of the processes and data stores, data flows. And you can see there's a trust boundaries there, but I just explained you that what is this trust boundaries. And it will help you to answer what can go wrong with the system we are working on. So for the STRIDE, the spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, DOS, elevation of privileges, you can see that that's a property attached to it. The spoofing, I'll just explain those properties in detail later. So spoofing is mainly for the authentication. Tampering, it's the integrity of the application. Repudiation is a denial, it's a non-repudiability. Information disclosure, which is the confidentiality part. Denial of service is availability. Elevation of privilege is authorization. So that's the coverage. So spoofing is a situation where a person or a program successfully identifies as another person or another program, falsify the data. Example like email spoofing, caller ID spoofing, website spoofing. So you know that spoofing is quite easier to understand. where the specific application or a program will identify as another person by falsifying the data. So that's mainly the spoofing part. Tampering. So it's literally the meaning of tampering, modification of the products or application and make them harmful to the consumer. So manipulate, destroy, editing the data. So you can see the websites, hacking, you can see the tampering coming in. Repudiation, so it's mainly the deny or contest on something. So it means you can say you transfer something to the bank and you say I didn't transfer it. That's mainly you deny it, but non-repudiation means you will not be able to deny or contest. So that's the meaning of non-repudiation. So basically, in terms of your bank transaction, you need to make sure, or the bank need to make sure that the person who start the transaction is a person who genuinely, that particular person, not another person. So that they will check. You need to log in. You need to give your account numbers, passwords, as well as you have a multi-factor authentication mechanisms to make sure that this is a genuine person. So that in a later stage, you will not be able to contest on that thing. Yeah, so that's the meaning of repudiation. Information disclosure, mainly the revealing or exposing the information, mainly the data breach, data leak or privacy breach. The denial of service, which is similar to the DOS, where the attacker will attack the machine or the network and make sure that the network resource is not available for the intended users, or temporary or indefinitely disrupting the services. So the layer 7 attacks or HTTP slow post, malware attacks to make your system slow down, or including even the SSL VPNs. You can see attackers put number of hangs there, so that you are not able to access your VPN, access your company information. So this is one of the services that may use by the attackers. Elevation of privilege, mainly to gain elevated access to the resources. Example like a jailbreaking, session fixation, cross-site scripting and all. So these are the definitions of this, right? I just would like to show how you apply this stride in steps. So there are 5 steps approach: scope and draw, analyze, mitigate, and document. Which is very simple to understand. Step 1, it's a scope. So basically you need to identify the attack surface and identify threat actors. In identify attack surface, maybe you decompose the system that you are planning to design, or the designed system, decomposes into logical and structural components like network protocols, web interface, CLIs, including the products or features, so in the services and all. So you can see here, you can actually choose an entire product to do a threat modeling, or you can use a subsystem or service, or a feature, a specific feature or a module. If it is, it's up to you how to use it, but I would suggest you start with a feature or module which is easier to manage. So break it into manageable chunks and do the threat modeling for specific small parts. Then you combine. So that will give you a good understanding of the the way how do you do the threat modeling, and what are the threats affected in that particular module, as well as finally you will get the entire product covered in the threat modeling. Yeah. And identify threat actors. So here I have given a few examples like a user, admin, and attacker, which is very high level. You can go into specific users in terms of administrative users versus your different level of access users. So you can just give that. Or the administrator itself, you can give different administrators, different kind of administrators. Or you can give even operators if you have operation teams. Sometimes it's combined in a DevOps teams, so you can give that. Attacker, normally will give the attacker as attacker itself. That's the external party that try to get into the systems. That's specifically the scope. And in the draw, basically that we are looking at in a data flow diagram. So if you already have a data flow diagram, it's good. You do not need to do further, because data flow diagram will provide you the basic step for starting the threat modeling. And the one item that extra is the trust boundaries. I mentioned previously the trust boundaries. The trust boundaries where the trust level change. So you need to see where are the trust level changes. So a trust level change if user changes or a network changes, or so you can look into a different aspects where the trust changes. If you have two programs running in the similar with the similar user access, you do not have much issues between that program. How do you manage that? But if you have different users accessing and information, then you can see the trust level changes. So that's one example. The other example is like in a 3-tier architecture, the application architecture like a web app and database. And we can see that different protocols that you use versus different methodologies that you use. So the trust level may change there, or sometimes it's not possible to treat web versus a database as the same trust level. So you need to make sure that where you actually look at the trust level. So the trust boundaries is mainly using for that. And the external entity is like just to explain to those people who are new to the data flow diagrams. External entities are mainly the rectangle box. Process or functions are circle or an oval. People use different methodologies in the data flows. The data flow is arrow, then a line with arrow, and the data storage is 2 lines and with the description as database or logs, files, outputs, data outputs and all, and trust boundaries as a dotted line. Analyze. Analyze is basically a matrix where that's tried in one place, and the other side is the topics that you are covering in the threat model, the issues. So this particular matrix called Common Vulnerability Scoring System, and this is very complex. When you look at it, you do not need to have this complexity in your threat modeling analysis. Actually, you can say no need of color coding. You can say it's a critical high, medium, low, or high, medium, low. That's, or even a simple tick whether it's affected or not. So you can make it as simpler as possible, or even if you want to have a very comprehensive information, then you can say you can give access, you can do a color coding, as well as you can give a rating. for the codes. So then you can finally get a score, which is in some organizations they use it, but I don't recommend that. Make it simpler. But I just gave you very complex examples so that you can see what extreme you can go. And the fourth step is mitigate, which you already have your requirements, where are the problems coming, and what kind of mitigations that you need to give. Yeah. Remember, at this time itself, you do not have these issues came in. You didn't see any issues in your actual systems because you are in the design stage itself. So these are the threats may occur in the future. So better you check that at the time of design stage and the development stage. Yeah. So that when you do a penetration testing at the later stage of SAST or DAST, these issues will not come in, or also at the time you can see that whether these issues they're rectified really or not. So that's the idea behind it. So what are the mitigate countermeasures that you need to put in? So it may be you change the protocols, or maybe you do additional steps to make sure that this will not happen. So anything. And step 5 is a documentation. And this documentation is very important in this threat modeling, where in the later stage, if you want to investigate some issues, so you can see that where is the flow coming up. Example, like you already done, the system already went into production, but still you got DOS attack. So you can see that where is that problem comes in, what you didn't look into. So then you can update it. You can redo it, analyze it, and update. Where another thing is that you need to relook at it every time when you change the systems. It is not a one-time activity. If you do a one-time activity and document it, then document will not help you. So the idea behind it is that whenever you have a major change in the system, you need to relook at it and find out whether you are really looking at those issues that you already identified, or is there any other issues may come in, and that has to be tested at the time of your penetration testing or your system testing. So that's a basic idea. Hope you understood. I just want to give you one example or a case study. So as I mentioned last time, I have given this scenario at the time of my introduction. The COVID-19 pandemic has created unprecedented challenges to the organizations, and it is critical to protect the interest of each organizations from the hackers. So you see that it's always coming up as attacker gets credentials from the phishing attacks, or the network department didn't patch the VPN servers properly, so that the hackers hacked into the system, or DDoS attacks. Example like SSL VPN servers, as I mentioned, it's possible for them to hang the server by attacking it, so that the employees cannot access the VPN servers. They cannot log into a VPN servers. Also, lack of logging and monitoring. Lack of logging and monitoring means it's lack of the logs. So you may not know, without the logs, you may not know what actually happened. So if you want to do any forensic in terms of any hacking, without the logs, you may not get much information on that. Also the monitoring of the servers. And remote desktop is maybe one of the major issues in the, now people are working, administrators are working from home. Now with the remote desktop protocols, connections, probably, I don't know, some companies may open it through the VPN, which is very, very dangerous situation. And how to avoid that. Then they need to look at. And endpoint security, mainly the laptop. If you connect your USB drives to the company laptop, how it works, and also the Windows patches. If your computer didn't patch properly, then it is possible for the attackers to get into their systems. So you see that this will be addressing in the current case study, where you can see that there's a very typical network diagram, where you can see the remote user is connecting to the VPN server through the firewall, company firewall, which is in the DMZ zone, and from the another firewall connecting to the intranet part through the switches going to the servers and the laptops. So these are the very typical network diagram. And what I've done was a data flow diagram based on that particular diagram. So you see that actors, user and admin, and as well as attacker. Mainly they will be accessing the office laptop. And there's a VPN tunnel, which is in this scenario, I put L2TP, IPsec, which is much secure servers. I just want to give you a good example than that one. And there's maybe a web access through the web server to the app server, and query SQL query from database server. So, but you can see the trust boundaries. I just mentioned only 2 trust boundaries, where I'm looking at only those 2 items now for the time being. Then the second step, you see that the threats, as I mentioned, and what are the issues may come in. Example, just attacker gets credentials through phishing attacks. So it's actually affecting most of the stride. The security awareness to employees, especially to identify phishing attacks. So the phishing attacks, you can do few ways. If your company is looking at, if you have a next-gen firewalls, then you can do a rule-based denial of the emails, as well as, especially the weakest link always will be the person sitting in front of the laptops. So you need to make sure that you're aware of what kind of email is there. Is there external emails? Is there any classification of external emails versus internal email? Or are you looking at the person who is actually sending that email, whether it is an internal person or an external person, and whether the content is not reliable or very fishy. So all these awareness will you can do a few ways. One is that give awareness, as well as in the backend check. So it depends on your company's policies. You can add the remediation. Also, multi-factor authentication implementation to protect the VPN accounts. So this is one way that you stop VPN attacks. So very, very simple remediations I've given here. So I don't have to go through each and every topic, every issue. You can just go through in a later stage if you're really interested to. So that's it mainly for those threat modeling. That's the threat modeling part. It's quite simple. You can do it in a very easy way if you take a very small module and try to do it. it's quite easy. And I can provide you some threat modeling tools, but my preference is whiteboard or use a paper. Just do it. It's quite easy to do it. But if you want to do a very big product, or you want to scale your threat modeling processes, and whiteboard may not be enough, so it's not scalable. There's quite difficult to do that. So you can use few of them. So if you want to just automate that the methodologies, the diagrams and all, Microsoft TM, the threat model tool is free. You can just use that. There's one thing I didn't say is the Stride is actually a Microsoft model, so you can use the Stride in the Microsoft TM tool quite easily. Also, the WASP, we have Threat Dragon. And if you want to do a scalable threat model tool, then you can use Aries Risk, which is one of the known product. But that's for a very big enterprises. We need a scalable threat modeling tool. Yep. So just conclusion, you see that it's quite in the COVID-19 pandemic poses a very unparalleled challenge. So it's very critical for your organizations to keep the security intact. So there are two topics I mentioned here: secure by design and the threat modeling. Just give you some points. So the secure by design, which considers the risk and the security part. Yeah. So you will look into the risk part. How do you manage this issue? Also, secure by design will help you to embed security into the development. So you can foresee many issues before you start working on the actual product or application. And it will make you free from vulnerabilities as much as possible. So this will not be a last word. Still, you have to do penetration testing before you bring the application to the production, as well as if it's DevOps, you can do a SAST and RAST at the time of your development cycle itself, sprint cycle itself. But once you implement this process, will help you to identify the vulnerabilities as early as possible. Also, the 10 design principles from WASP. From the threat modeling perspective, which will analyze the potential threats. So it's a potential threats, it's not actual threats. And so it helps to fix security issues before they occur. And a simple threat modeling. So you can use this methodology: scope, throw, analyze, mitigate, and document. And you can use the threat modeling tools. So that's mainly my topic. So if you want to start, become a proficient at threat modeling, you need to do a threat model. So there is no other way. That's why I just gave you a very simple methodology to start with. Once you start doing it, you know the power of that tool or power of that methodology. Thank you very much. And if you see, the threat modeling is not the one-time activity. So every time when you put a defend or a defense, yeah, so attackers will go around that. So you need to always do a proactive approach to identify more and more threats. That's it from my side. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Sanjay, for the very detailed sharing. Now we are open to questions from the participants. You can either raise your hand or type your questions in the chat window. Then Sanjeev can take some of your questions. You can also unmute if there's no one asking questions. Sanjeev, maybe I just get the ball rolling, right?
Okay.
You see, in our organization, like enterprise-wide, right, we put in lots of security solutions, right? How do we ensure that all the security solutions really support our organization business objectives?
Okay, that's a good question. So if you look at from the security perspective, right, the security starts from a risk, right? So it is nothing to do with your tools or the tools that you use in the organization. So basically, you need to start with the risk part. So and you need to do a risk analysis. Also, the organization should have a cybersecurity policy. So basically, the tool will help you to manage the risks. So you may have a different kind of security solutions for different purposes. Probably for risk management, you have one. You have penetration testing, you have one. Or so you have, it's possible that you have many systems, but the focus is always should be to the risk of the company and what you need, or what are the tools that you need to mitigate that risk. Hope I understand your question.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you should start from the risk analysis of the some of the threats to the company, and what are, yeah.
Because there are hundreds of solutions available outside. So people may be wondering, can I buy this solution versus that solution? So that will be a wrong message if you ask somebody that which solution is better. What you need to look at is you look into your own processes, your own business side, what kind of risk that they can take, what kind of mitigations they need to do in order to mitigate that particular risk. So then you can see, based on that approach, you can find a solution, because you do not, the base of that is you do not need to apply the risk for every applications in the similar way. Suppose if you have 10 applications in your organization, you do not have to put or you don't have to do the security application in all these 10 applications as similar way. You need to do you have to identify the risk of all these applications. You have to find the most risk applications. We call it as crown jewels, and that will be you need to give much care on that particular applications. Then you treat applications, all applications are similar. So that way you may not be, you will know that which application you need to give much importance and what kind of cost involving in that application, what kind of if you didn't mitigate that particular risk, what kind of expenses that incur in the future. So then from there, you know that how much money you need to put in for that particular, to mitigate that particular risk. From there, you know what kind of solutions that you can buy. So you cannot buy, there are solutions which are available, maybe a simplistic solution, maybe coming from a 20,000 words, versus there are solutions, similar kind of solutions with much more features coming from $1 million. But how do you choose is based on how much risk, risk that you mitigate, and what kind of systems that you need to be there to mitigate a particular risk.
Okay, right. Just to probe a bit more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that any comments on the view that usually in organizations, right, risk analysis is done in silos, right? That means business will do their risk analysis, and then IT, cybersecurity, they will do their own risk analysis. It's not like integrated across. Are you facing some of these challenges in your organization?
Not in my organization, but I have experiences. So basically, it is it's mainly the culture. First one is a culture. The second is how do you the organization they built in. Example like main risk officer is a CRO, and most of the time the security will be under CIO or under an IT side. So this will give a very difficult situation for a security person, to go into the business and understand the business. So one idea is either we need to involve CIO and influence the CRO. So that's another way. Otherwise, a CISO role will always help to mitigate these problems. Like a CISO will be a person who is either in the same level as CIO, or will be part of the C organization, where he has a direct connection to the CROs. So that will be one of the ways. So it depends on the organizations. So if you have this problem, most probably because of the way that the organization built up for the security.
Okay, thanks for the response. I think we have some questions from the chat window, right? So Mankyu is asking if how do you know if you have done too little or too much threat modeling?
Okay. Yeah, actually, it's possible that you will you may go into that stage. You know that, as I mentioned, you can go from can do it for a module or a feature versus your product. So if you go more into the threat modeling, it's actually good in the sense you can find a lot of issues. But the other way, if you do a threat modeling for the sake of threat modeling, and if you identify very minimal issues, that may not be a good idea. Example like if you are very new in the security side, and you may not know. So if you may not know the threat scenarios, what kind of threats may come in, that may be one of the issues that I foresee. You can see that that can be easily solved by discussing with a security person who is proper security person in your organization. That's one way. You collaborate with him or her and discuss the scenarios with them, or you can learn on the security part, because anyway, any architect or a solution architect or a designer should have the security always in the mind. In this new, if you create a new solutions in this era, without that, it's very difficult to survive in that in the business environment, because you need to give very high importance for security whenever you architect a solution. So either you can rely on a person who is good at that, or you can develop yourself into identify the threats. So this way, you see whether you can find more and more threats. So in my scenario, I don't really worry about I get 100 or 200 threats. You can do that actually. Nobody will stop you. The work is quite a lot, but you may identify quite a lot of issues from there. It's quite an eye opener actually after that. But my issue is the other way. If you do not know, and if you didn't identify a threat, and you identify that in the penetration testing stage, which will repeat the story of actually you didn't do a threat modeling and you do directly in the penetration testing. So this may take some time for you to experience and get that experience from the practice.
Okay. Do you have like challenges to convince your project sponsor to like spend time on threat modeling, or because usually they will be more concerned on like launching the projects, right? The systems, yeah, getting the system out fast, yeah.
Yeah, there are challenges. As everywhere you see the new topics coming up, everywhere there are challenges. But the idea behind it is that you need to give them the confidence. So you need to involve them. So that's the idea behind it. It's example like one example, not on the security side, but if you look at the DevOps pair programming, the two people doing the same coding, can you justify it? But you can see that after a while, you can see that the errors are lesser, your time-taking process is lesser, which will give a very good credibility to the pair programming. So there are pros and cons, but the idea behind what I suggest is that you involve them. So make them understand that why you do this process, so that you can see that if you do that, if you didn't do this time, if you do it at penetration testing time, and if they find a big error at that time, and the cost of slowing the implementation of the system, which will be much higher than if you spend a little bit more time now and identify it and involve the designers as well as the developers to make sure that these items will not repeat again. So that's the convincing part you need to do.
Okay. So on to another comment. Michael Ling has this comment: threat models aid you in your risk assessment. That's my opinion. Mm-hmm. If you don't even know your threats, how do you know your risks? Right. So any thoughts on that, the comment? Threat models aid you in your risk assessment. That's my opinion. If you don't know your threats, how do you know your risk? Yeah.
Okay. Actually the risk is the risk I mentioned is a bit different from what is the threats. Yeah. So it's in a bit different way. I'm not talking about threat as a risk, yes, for the time being. The risk what I mentioned was the business risks. Yeah. So the risk assessment normally do is the business risk. So example, actually you can combine some of them. Example like there is a availability problem for the website. What kind of cost, what kind of risk is that for a customer service department? That may be one of the cases that, as you mentioned. But other than that, so we are looking at more on the business angle for the risk assessment part. And threat modeling side, we are not really looking at the business risk, but we are looking at more a technical risk. Whenever there are the attacks comes in example, because of the protocols are not really correct, or they didn't, or the firewall rules are not correct. So all these things, maybe the technical issues probably will come into the threat modeling. So we need to do a balance. There are some cases may overlap in the sense you have a case where, as I mentioned, there will be a DDoS attack, then the system is down or the website is down, then what will happen to the business? And that actually you can do in the risk analysis, if risk assessment, if you want to do. But I'm thinking about that not from the DDoS attack, but I'm thinking about from the availability of the website. Yeah, so it's in the different aspects where we are doing. So one aspect you do from the risk side, where business aspect, which is the availability of the website. Other one we do from threat modeling side, where we look at if there is a DDoS attack, how do you manage it? Whether you put a defense for that in your system to identify the DDoS and mitigate, and how do you mitigate it? So when it comes to your development side, you have two scenarios will combine together. One is from your business requirement. Let's say that I want the system to be alive 24/7. So how do you do that? So that's one item coming from business side. Whereas from the threat model side, you will get how do you protect the DDoS attack. So maybe it's two merged together sometime, but I like to identify it as two, then better combine it at the development or a testing time than to test it.
Okay, moving on to the next question from Daniel Wong. He's asking for what kind of metrics are recommended for threat modeling and mitigation modeling. For example, amount of time a skilled attacker may take to break something. So he's asking for some metrics here.
Yeah. Actually, we may not know how the attacker works. Yeah. So there are many ways you can do it. Like a phishing attacks or APTs, and so you don't know how they are coming up. So there are many ways it can come in. So we need to create scenarios and see how it works. Yeah. So there is one way. That's why the VAST model actually, and even PASTA models. The PASTA model also have an attacker focused. So PASTA model actually what they do is it will simulate how the attacker works. It's from the attacker point of view, and see what are the kind of attacks the attacker can initiate, and what kind of way to go in. So there are many ways you can look into it. Anyway, this is not sufficient sometimes, because the attacker will not directly go into as I mentioned, you see the picture here, the attacker will not directly go to a very much defensive systems. So they will find a workaround. They will go around the system. They will see which systems are not really patched, or not very small systems. Maybe it may be a logging system, or it may be a simple website hosted system, which is not your actual company website. Maybe something else, or maybe a vendor managed system. So they will find a system where which is having a least security, and they go there and then go to the escalation of privileges. So you see in the stripe, the escalation of privileges. So they move laterally, then they find a way to identify the passwords from there to move to the other system. So we may not know all these, how do they attack, but PASTA or VAST, it will actually look into some of these aspects. So Stride will not do that, but actually you can, as I mentioned, there's an attacker as a threat actor. So actually you can see from there what kind of attacks you may expect. So that actually you can do. So we are looking at very straightforward methodologies, not on the the way that the attacker actually go inside. So if they're coming straight into the system, the specific system, how it will affect. That's we are looking at. We may not be able to look at in other aspects in threat modeling unless you do a threat model for each and every system, and then you may have more defensive mechanisms.
Okay, moving on to the next question from Philip Ng. All right, Philip Ng is asking, does vulnerability assessment and penetration testing services complement threat modeling? Would you include vulnerability assessment and penetration testing into a comprehensive threat modeling exercise?
Probably the first question is mainly it will complement. Yeah, that's my idea. Yeah, so anyway, the threat modeling you are doing at very beginning. At the time, you do not have any systems. You have only requirements from the user, and you may have some designs maybe drawn in a Visio or in an Excel, in a PowerPoint. You may not have anything materialized at the time of your threat model, because the threat model is telling about the potential threats. And how do you verify that particular potential threat? So you identify all the potential threats, and you say that all these in the stride, we mapped into a stride and see that these are the potential threats may occur. Yeah, it didn't occur yet. Yeah, so it may occur, and those are you have to you have to pass this to the designer. So when they design the system, you need to see all these items, see whether this possibility you already noticed in that design. So that's the first time the designer will look into it and update the design. And the next step is the developer. So when you develop, you say this is a threat model, and you see these items coming in when you do a developer system. Yeah, so that's the second step, that you verify your threat model. That is really they work on this. So these two are actually, we are giving them advice from the threat model that this may occur. Yeah, but the vulnerability testing, the vulnerability assessment penetration testing time, you are verifying it, whether the design that done by the designer as well as the development done by the developer, they really followed that particular issues. So you're simulating these vulnerabilities in the VIPT side. Then you can identify that whether they already done or not. If they really didn't do, actually it's come back to the original, because they have to redo it. So it go back to the design, to the developer or designer side. That's a time that we have much cost comes in. So actually our idea is to fix it as early as possible. If they didn't do properly their due diligence, then their cost may occur higher.
Okay, so moving on to the final question from Ruth, right? It's an interesting comment. Ruth says that, okay, I think there's another question that came in just now. Ruth mentioned that sometime in 2018, there's a security leading to our PM's health data leak. In your opinion, which threat model should have been used? Okay.
Yeah, actually, you can use Stride itself. It's a very simplistic, but it's powerful. Actually, you do not really need to look at FASTA, which is a very complicated, but very comprehensive, or VAST. These two I know, but other models I really didn't do it myself. But every time when I do that, right, all those FASTA or VAST, I will go back to the Stride, because that's very simplistic and I can do most of that issues in Stride itself. So Stride will cover most of that issues. Actually, you can do a Stride for almost every cases. 99% of cases you can do Stride. So that will actually cover your, and it's not a foolproof methodology. I just want to mention that. You can whatever that you do, still there will be vulnerabilities. Yeah? But the idea behind it is that minimize it as much as possible. We can. So that's the idea behind it. So if you find it out at the time of penetration testing, and if you want to change the code and retest it, the penetration testers price, probably you may know now, or if you're working on this, the penetration testers daily price, which is 10 times higher than the developers. So from there how much cost incur if you have a penetration testing failed and you go back to a developer and redo it. Yeah, unless penetration testing is by internal parties. Most of the companies, penetration testing is by the vendors. So you need to be very careful with that.
Okay, I think there's one question that just came in from Shrikant from PwC. His question is, how different is threat modeling versus maintaining a risk register where threats are mapped to people, process, and technology, or are both advised to be used in a flow where the output from a threat model form an input to a risk register?
Actually, that's a good question. I used to have that. If you look at from the risk angle, right? So when you start, you start a risk also from a business angle, and also you do a threat from your IT angle. So normally we do both. In my previous experience, I do both. So we have risk coming from business side, that and the threats coming from IT side. So actually, the threat model, what we identified as a threat, you can add into the risk register. So that's the idea behind it is. And so in the risk registry, you have the risk from the business side as well as the risk from the threat model itself. Even that some organizations, it may not be possible, but in my opinion, it is better you keep it as a recorded. And once you finish your VAPT, your penetration testing, you make it mitigated in your risk register. That is actually a very true and honor way, but sometimes it may raise questions from the audit side as well as from the business side, that why too many risks in the risk registry. Yeah, so that's depends on your organization. How do they look into those risks? So some people do not like many risks hanging over there in the risk register. Some are happy because they find as much as risk as possible from that angle. Yeah. So you need to do a balance on that. So it depends on the organization. I like to put my potential risk also there in the risk registry as a deviation. Then I put I will close it only if I fix those issues in the vulnerability assessment or penetration testing. So once I go through that and they see there is no example a DDoS attack that I identified, and I done a mitigation in my design and in the development itself, or in my network side, I mitigated it. But I don't know whether it's really mitigated or not, only if I do a system testing as well as a penetration testing. So once we finish that, I can easily say that I have a proof that penetration testing didn't find any DDoS attacks, anything on that. So I close that. So that's the way, it's the ideal way. But it all depends on the organization. Sometimes too many defects hanging, so too many risks hanging, it may not be a good sign for IT teams. So yeah, otherwise I would suggest that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks Sanjit for the, I think before there's another, there's another comment from the chat window.
Okay.
Okay, from Michael Ling, right?
Mhm.
My view is that as the threat landscape is evolving every other day, so your models should be reviewed along with landscape evolution. So it should evolve along with the threat intelligence and technical techniques. So it will never be complete.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So a threat model will not give you, as I said, very comprehensive report. It will give you very, very basic issues. These are the basic issues. You can see that if you look at without a threat model, if you go into just a design and the development and go for the penetration testing, the issues coming in the penetration testing, which you may think that, oh, this one is quite easy thing, it could have mitigated very, very early before if the developer knew about it. This kind of, you can see that this kind of questions coming every time. It's mainly people may not understand it because some of them actually doing it as a part of their development cycle, and they didn't really see what is the benefit of doing the threat model. A threat model will not help you to to fix all the defects that we find it in a vulnerability analysis or penetration testing time, which you never get happen. Yeah, so it's not that scenario, and it's not the case. Mainly for you to have a proactive approach to identify threats as much as early as possible. But still, you can see there are some issues may come in the penetration testing. But if you look at from a cost angle, the idea behind it is to reduce the effort of a penetration tester as much as possible and reduce the penetration test cycle as much as possible. So if you do one-time penetration testing, normally it is not a big issue because it's anyway you have to do. But if you want to do 2 times, okay, 3 times, management will raise question. Why you are doing 3 times penetration testing and you didn't identify, you didn't mitigate that issue. And 4th time, surely no way, it will be escalated. So because the cost of doing a penetration testing is much, much higher. So the idea of threat modeling is to reduce the effort of the penetration tester as much as possible so that you can save a lot of money, a lot of time at the time of mitigating these defects.
Okay, thanks, Sanjeev. Right, that's the final question. So thanks, Sanjeev, for the very detailed sharing of experience. Right.
Okay.
So before we lock off the Zoom session, just a reminder to participants to help us fill up the feedback form. The link is shared on the chat window. Right. So once we receive your feedback, we'll be sending to you the presentation slides. Yeah. So gentle reminder to fill out the feedback, and also let us know in future sessions what topics, right, architecture topics you would like to listen to, right? So we'll try to arrange also, right? So that's all for this evening. So once again, thanks Sanjeev for the detailed sharing, right?
Thank you very much.
And to all participants, have a good evening, and look forward to you joining us for future forums. And take care and stay safe.